What's up guys, Cameron here from Drums and Drams, and in today's video, we've got another episode of bottles that you and I will probably never own, this time featuring the 2022 George T. Stagg from the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection. This sample was sent to me from Yung-Pei Chang, someone who is just an epic member of the WhiskeyTube community. He's in all the live chats. You might have seen him around. Either way, Yung, thank you so much for this sample. You have sent me some incredible stuff over the last couple of years. Now you're sending me George T. Stagg and all sorts of other things, so I can't thank you enough for your incredible generosity. I'm gonna go ahead and pour this out. This is 138.7 proof, or 69.35% ABV. What's unique about 2022 in particular is just the fact that we didn't have a release last year. Buffalo Trace, many of you will remember, came out and said that the barrels just were not ready for 2021. So we actually only saw Eagle Rare 17, Sazerac 18, Thomas H. Handy, and the William LaRue Weller. That's hard to say fast. Anyways, those were the only four that we saw last year in 2021, and now 2022 sees the return of George T. Stagg. Let's check it out here on the nose. First impression of this whiskey, it is extremely freaking hot. Some of you out there are gonna like that, and truthfully, I like high proof stuff too. Sometimes I like it to even come off high proof. Like I like it to be a challenge in some ways, but for a product like this, from a line like the Antique Collection, that just has such a reputation to kind of uphold for itself, I hate the fact that this is coming off so hot. With that said though, there are some delicious and very nice notes coming out of the glass. Let's talk more about those in a second. Yeah, so negativity out of the way. I'm not gonna talk about the ethanol anymore. This is a red fruit monster of a whiskey. You get these concentrated, rich, full-bodied red fruits that are somewhat juicy, somewhat candied and syrupy, somewhat dry. It kind of runs the gamut, but it's just a humongous red fruit monster. There's also this interesting leather note. And when you think about Buffalo Trace products, you don't typically think about leather notes. When I get that kind of a profile, I'm usually thinking of like a Jim Beam, Knob Creek type thing. But with Buffalo Trace, a highly aged product, typically you just get a lot of sweet oak. And that sweet oak is not its own kind of individual note that you recognize on the nose, at least not for me. It's actually like just a foundational element, maybe like a basis that everything kind of plugs into. All of the other notes are then just supported by the sweet oak. I think the leather note in the George T. Stagg is showing us what happens when you leave Buffalo Trace distillate in the barrel this long, especially at this proof, mash bill 1, maybe those are specific things that are impacting it as well. I actually really like the leather note here. It's like that, it's like a wet, aged, antique-y kind of leather smell, and it adds a little flair to the whiskey, which is really, really nice. So besides the really obvious notes, which are those red fruits, the leather, I'm also getting some good vanillas going on in here, kind of like that really aged vanilla cream note I talk about on highly aged whiskeys. So that is a big, big thumbs up from me. Tons of black pepper, tons of cinnamon. It's got a little bit of an aromatic spice quality to it. I also talked about that on the William LaRue Weller from 2022 as well. A little bit of that like aromatic cinnamon stick, clove kind of thing going on here too. There's a little dark chocolate on the back end, a little bit of a barrel char note. Both of those are kind of blending in nicely with that leather quality. And finally, let's just kind of talk about some of the background notes in this whiskey. One of them is a note that someone actually taught me a couple of months ago, which is not just brown sugar, but actually the brown bag that the brown sugar comes in. It has kind of a very distinct, not cardboard, but kind of papery brown sugar note. If you guys know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments, but if you think I'm crazy also, you can tell me that too. There's also a toasted cornbread note. Interestingly enough, I actually got that on a Michter's 20, which I reviewed recently, and in a blind flight, I have mistaken George T. Stagg for Michter's 20, so it's interesting that they share that commonality. And the last note that I want to call out on this, which is super faint, and maybe it's just because I'm getting into wine right now and I'm thinking a lot about wine notes, but I get this kind of vegetal thing. Some people say green pepper or bell pepper on wine. I tend to recognize that note a little bit more like raw Brussels sprouts or raw broccoli. And it's much easier and much more obvious and much more common, I would say, in wine, maybe even Irish whiskey. But I'm getting a little bit of this vegetal thing on the back end of this George T. Stagg. So that might be me being crazy. I don't know. Enough talking. Let's go to the palate now. Very excited for this. Cheers. Wow, so between that sip I just took and right now, it's probably been like a full minute of silence I had to cut because this whiskey punched me in the mouth. I am telling you what, like the first half of the palate experience of the development of this whiskey was kind of unpleasant because it's just really, really hot. There are so many great notes in here that are masked by ethanol, and I think it's really affecting the front palate, even into the mid palate as it starts to sweeten up. Now, when it does start to sweeten up, it becomes just incredible. It's lush, it's full-bodied, humongous. A lot of the spice rolls off. You get into those sweeter vanillas, all the red fruits, and even that toasted cornbread, which was not so obvious on the nose. On the mid palate, as it rolls back, I think that note becomes very obvious, actually. Just so much ethanol, so much pepper and cinnamon. I'm not a wussy. I promise you that. Well, maybe a little bit. A whiskey wussy. I'm gonna have to trademark that. I mean, I like high proof stuff, but I find myself complaining about this, and it's like, am I missing something here? Am I missing some element of this whiskey that should help me accept the fact that it's kind of unpleasant and kind of just alcohol forward? I don't know. I'm confused a little bit. I know a lot of people love this 2022 release of George T. Stagg. I can see why, but I think we might need to be a little more picky, at least from my point of view, a little more picky about this whiskey just because, you know, we waited a full year for it. Maybe the second sip is gonna be different. I don't know. We're gonna find out right now. Cheers, second sip. Let me know in the comments if you guys have this, what you think of it, especially on your first sip of the night of this stuff. Second sip is a totally different ballgame. I took a significantly smaller sip and I did not rinse it around my palate too much, which truthfully is a big factor when you're drinking whiskey. How big is the sip? How much are you rinsing it around? If it's a lower proof or a more delicate whiskey, do more of those things to get a bigger experience. And if it's a big whiskey, small sips, don't rinse it around so much. That was all red fruit from the get-go. Deliciously sweet, full-bodied, velvety, but right now I'm into the finish, and the only thing that I can taste besides like a furnace in my chest and in the back of my throat is grass. In my opinion, the note of freshly cut grass is a fault in whiskey, at least in American whiskey, in particular bourbon. I think rye, if you have a really grassy rye, that's a different thing. Rye is known for its herbal, its green, vegetal, minty, outdoorsy character, whereas bourbon is not known as much for that. It's known for its sweeter, caramelized, fruity character, stuff like this. And I've heard people from distilleries mention grassy notes in barrels that they considered to be not good barrels. That might not be the case everywhere, but in my mind, a heavily grassy whiskey is a whiskey that has some sort of a fault in it. And we don't talk about these things enough in bourbon, in my opinion, at least with a lot of reviews that go out there. With a grassy finish like this, it just tastes cheap on the finish. Ezra 99 has the same issue, and a lot of other, lesser whiskeys. So I don't want to go on a tirade about this. I'm gonna do one more sip. I'm gonna give it a fair shake on a third sip. But my God, like the ethanol, the heat, and now the grassiness, we just have this middle part of the whiskey, the mid palate that's so good, but the front of the palate and the finish now have kind of taken a turn for the worse. So here we go, final sip. Tons of red fruit again, getting a little bit more into like a chocolatey caramel kind of profile. Actually, a bit of a sourness, a bit of a tanginess to the fruit notes on the third sip. As we're getting into it now, the grassiness is starting to rear its ugly head again. So I don't know about this. I think I would need to taste the 2020 next to the 2022 to get a better idea. If memory serves, I would say the 2020 might actually be my favorite of the two because just the balance, everything like that, where this one seems a little bit more brash. It's for all of the proof lovers out there. If you don't mind a grassy finish, you might really dig this stuff. Thank you again to Yung-Pei Chang for sending the sample my way. I really appreciate it. I hope this review doesn't make you regret sending it my way. I'm just trying to be picky with such an allocated and highly sought after release. Like, subscribe, or dislike if you completely disagree with me, or maybe just like it anyways. Help the channel out, check out the Patreon, all those good things. Cheers, and I'll see you next time here on Drums and Drams.